And welcome back to the drawing room. Rob Howard here with Patrick in kind of a fireside chat format. And Patrick, you haven't been on the show for a while, so why don't you talk about what you've been playing lately?
The thing that actually been playing lately that got me the most excited was I finally got around to finishing Nier Automata, reached the final ending. Absolutely excellent game. Very refreshing in a lot of ways. I would actually say my favorite game since 2005.
High praise indeed. And of course, I played this game as well a while ago, but I only got through one ending, total amateur hour, I know. But it was just so bleak. That's why I couldn't hang with it. So does it get less bleak?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I mean, by the end of the game, I think really it's an enormous lesson in optimism, and I felt like I could do anything when I finished.
That's great. And how many hours do you think did you put in this?
So it actually stops clocking your hours at 99.99. So something above that.
Okay, so obviously a massive time commitment game, of course, which of course is I'm no stranger to that. So I still own it, so perhaps I'll return to it and try to get additional endings and eventually get to some of the cool stuff that I'm sort of aware of, but we won't spoil for the audience, of course. So what I've been playing recently, I've been playing Resident Evil Village, which is a very good, sort of new take on Resident Evil. It sort of combines a little bit from Resident Evil 7, which I didn't care for at all. I'm no stranger to dissing that game. You know, it's just not my favorite Resident Evil. I know a lot of people love it, but it combines some of that. So it has some of those elements, but it has a lot of Resident Evil 4 in its DNA, which I love, right? Like, I really learned to love Resident Evil from 4, 5, not so much 6, but Resident Evil Revelations 1 and 2. Those are the games that were my jam.
Yeah.
Right. Especially 4 and 5. 4 and 5 are just incredible experiences. And let me just shout out to 5, because 4 is praised, and it should get all the praise that it gets, but 5 is low-key awesome. A lot of people say it's their favorite Resident Evil, actually.
So I would agree that it's awesome. Not that I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but I think what it actually shows is that the formula from Part 4, which is very suspenseful, very much survival horror, can still be applied to a kind of crazier action game and still work.
Right, absolutely. And by the way, let me just say to the audience, since this is a fireside chat format, my children are upstairs. You might actually hear them upstairs, even though I told them not to come downstairs and make noise. But the microphone's really sensitive, so I thought I would say that, because we are in a more informal setting than I normally like to do these things in. But anyway, yeah, so I think the reason why some people... I don't prefer 5 to 4, I prefer 4. I think 5, the action mechanics were just so finely tuned, even more so than 4. And plus it has... it had its own kind of mercenaries-like side mode that people really love and everything. It was a great co-op experience, which a lot of people look at positively. It was one of the first, before Joseph Fares, it was a game that was designed from the ground up, really, to be co-op, and it really shows. But nonetheless, the point is, Resident Evil Village combines a lot of that DNA into some of the other things that they brought into 7, which, at least in my thinking, sort of Capcom took a look at what was happening in the horror game scene, especially Steam and PC horror games like Outlast and Amnesia and games of that nature, where you have a powerless protagonist, lots of uber powerful enemies that instantly kill you, and you're always trying to avoid them. And a lot of these games were created, really, in my mind, for the Twitch streaming generation, to sort of see streamers freak out over jump scares. And it's just a different sort of thing. And I always feel like Resident Evil 7 was taking, whether or not that's really the case or not, it felt like it was taking a inspiration from those games, which are not really my favorite in terms of survival horror. I like a heavier blend of action. But the good news is Resident Evil Village brings that back. It has a heavier dose of action. It is still in first person, like Resident Evil 7. But it is a game where you have a lot more agency over what happens. There's still some scares. There's still uber powerful enemies, but it has a much more balanced feel. I highly recommend it to fans of the series. One of the better AAA games I've played actually in quite some time.
I have to ask, since I haven't played it yet and I want to know what to expect. Is there ever a scene where you're fighting creatures inside a live active volcano?
Alas, I don't think I haven't actually gotten all the way through the game yet. I'm like 90% through it, I think, but no volcano yet.
Okay, because when I think survival horror, that's a survival horror staple right there.
Right, yes. Otherwise, I've been playing a lot of retro games. Actually, recently, I've bought quite a few, and I'm staring at them right now in front of my television, which is right next to the fireplace. So, yeah, I got Rad Racer in front of me, Cabal, The Adventures of Bayou Billy, The Goonies 2, which is surprisingly good, surprisingly deep game, Goonies 2. I have a copy of Renegade that I sadly cannot get to work on my Retron 5. We'll see what I can do with that. And Cybernoid, which is kind of a weird but interesting game. And probably, to me, my most emotionally favorite purchase in terms of all these retro games. The NES cartridge of Metal Gear is in this pile as well. It's not necessarily because I'm going to go and spend lots of time with it, but because, it's my favorite game series right now, even though who knows what Konami's doing with it. Who knows if they're going to make another one ever. I certainly think they probably will, but it's kind of cool to own, even though it's certainly not rare. It's not expensive. It's cool to own, like, the thing that kind of, for Americans anyway, started it all. Not for the Japanese. They were playing it on the MXS computer. But for us Americans, that NES copy of Metal Gear with the additional content that's not very good, but the additional content that Kojima didn't put in, that was our first exposure, to the series. And the PSP. I've been playing the PSP a lot as well. Right. By the way, here's where you can tell that I'm a professor and have the summer off, because Patrick answers one game, and I'm like, well, here's all these retro games. Here's a AAA game. Here's the PSP. But I recently reacquired a PSP, and I've been playing, Metal Gear Portable Ops on it, which has been actually surprisingly good. It's better than I remember.
And have you played Portable Ops Plus?
That's a great story. I'm glad you brought that up, Patrick. So, okay. All right, so here's what happens. All right, a few weeks ago, I get my PSP, and there's a handful of retro game stores in the area. And I go to one of them, and I see Portable Ops Plus on the shelf. It's got the box art. It's sitting on the shelf in the PSP section. Excuse me. And so I see it there. And I think, great, Portable Ops Plus, awesome, right? And I was actually looking for Portable Ops. So I was maybe even a little slightly disappointed, right? So I just buy Portable Ops on eBay, right? So I have Portable Ops purchased on eBay, and I have this copy of Portable Ops Plus that I bought from a local retro game store. All right, fast forward to yesterday, right? So we're finally ready because you brought your PSP and your copy of Portable Ops Plus in order to engage in some local multiplayer. And I'm like excited. I pull out my box of Portable Ops Plus. It's right there. And I'm not looking at it too close. I pull out the disc and I put the UMD disc in my PSP. First weird thing I notice is the logo on the menu screen on my PSP simply says Portable Ops, not Portable Ops Plus. And what I think is like, Konami was really lazy here. They just didn't even update the logo, right? So whatever, right? I fire it up. I hear it, do its thing. It goes into the menu. And then the other thing I noticed, because you have your version of Portable Ops Plus playing on your PSP, I notice it's different music than what's on mine. Now I'm starting to realize maybe it's not that Konami was lazy. Maybe something is wrong. And I notice it's just Portable Ops, not Portable Ops Plus. And I'm like, what? And I double check to make sure I didn't somehow stupidly grab my Portable Ops UMD disc instead or whatever. And I look in the box, and it's got the Portable Ops instruction manual, Portable Ops Plus instruction manual there, right? It's a Portable Ops Plus box. I'm looking at this. It's Portable Ops Plus. I know it is. I know what the box art looks like. Then suddenly, it's one of those things. You know how if you look at a sentence where someone's removed a word from the sentence, your brain will just kind of fill it in for you? You know how your brain will do that, right?
Yep.
Well, my brain had been playing this trick on me. I looked at the box, and where it should say plus, someone had taken a black marker and just markered over the word plus.
Yep. Sharpied out the plus.
So it just said portable ops.
This is good enough. We don't have the portable ops
And they
box,
did
so
that.
we'll just cross out plus.
In almost every spot where it says
Yep.
portable ops
Yep.
plus.
I think even the front
front of the
cover
manual.
of the manual,
Yep.
but then you go inside the manual and they weren't that.
That would have been kind of
yeah.
amazing. I would have been maybe less mad if they'd
Yeah,
gone to
right.
that amount of trouble. But no, the front of the box, the spine of the box, the back of the box, they took a Sharpie and just went right over where it says plus. And they're like, cool, it's now a portable ops box, not a portable ops plus. They just erased the word plus on the portable ops plus box art. And I bought this thing thinking it was portable ops plus because it's a portable ops plus box. Why would I think it's just regular portable ops? And so, yes, I currently own 2 copies of the regular portable ops, which I'm, kind of sad about. And I've already got a copy of Portable Ops Plus eBaying to me now as we speak. Hopefully, I don't see a Sharpied over plus on that one. That would be truly bizarre. But that is super weird. It's kind of tied for weirdest thing that's happened to me on a retro game purchase. I bought a copy of Russian Attack from a retro game store in Tennessee, and someone had put a different circuit board inside the case. And so it was a completely different game. Some kind of, it was like a pretty late in the NES life cycle game. I'm not going to remember the name of it. It was an okay game, but not Russian Attack, which is, of course, what I wanted, right? So, yeah, that was a little weird. All right, so we should move on now.
Moving on,
yes. To our topic today. Actually, we really have 2 things to talk about today. We do.
Oh, okay.
Actually, we'll see how this goes. I did want to bring up, I'll just say to our listeners, I was thinking we might talk about Tommy Wiseau's The Neighbors a little bit today. If we see how our initial first conversation goes with the actual game we want to talk about. This is a video game podcast today. I know it's the drawing room. It could be about anything. Today is another video day. We're going to talk about Disaster Report 4.
Ha ha ha, what a story, Rob.
Yes. Disaster Report 4 is our main topic of conversation. And so, Patrick, first of all, I know we're in this fireside chat format, so we're not in front of our computers with like Wikipedia and the research department. But if you can regale us with anything you might know about the history of this game.
Yep. So I'm thinking back, and yeah, since unfortunately the research department took the day off, I don't know why you let them do that. But it was somewhere in the vicinity of the year 2000 to 2002, somewhere in that range. A game called Disaster Report was released for the PS2. And I'm trying to recall, I think in my head, I've always thought that it was Irem, the developers of R-Type that created it, but I'm not 100% on that, and it's always possible that maybe they were just the publisher. But I think it was Irem. But it was released on the PS2, and the premise of the game is that you are a regular person, and you are in a Japanese city, and then an earthquake strikes, and the game really focuses on how you deal with the aftermath of that earthquake in terms of handling your own survival, eating food, finding water that's safe to drink, etc., and helping out other people along the way. So it's essentially a post-disaster sim in that sense. But along the way, I mean, there was still danger that was happening due to aftershocks and all of that. But it was really set in that time immediately after the earthquake happened and ravaged the city.
Yeah, and for me, I hadn't heard of this series before until I encountered a game that is sort of in the same genre, although what do you even call this genre, right? This is its own kind of weird micro genre. There's not, there's certainly no American equivalent to Disaster Report that I can think of, or European equivalent. I think it's its own little micro genre in Japan. The you're surviving a disaster genre, whatever that is,
Yeah.
the disaster genre.
Right. Yeah, and the interesting thing is that in Japan, they also have had a bunch of games in different series where, for example, you end up stranded on an island and have to survive. So this is, I think, kind of the successor to the stranded on desert island survival genre. Now you have the post-disaster survival genre.
Right. And the game I had played that is in this genre, but did not, as it turned out, prepare me for this experience like at all, is a game called Disaster Day of Crisis, which was done by Monolith Soft. That would be, yes, the same people that did Xenoblade, Xenogears, all those things. And that was one of those games that, for fans of the Nintendo Wii, everyone was screaming to get an American localization, to get an American release. And I remember Nintendo of America's like, no, we don't think this would sell well here. It was always one of those like bones of contention with the American Nintendo office, especially because there was a UK English dub even available. So it's not even like they had to do anything. But I did eventually play that as a import when I soft modded my Nintendo Wii back in the day. And that, even though it is in that same genre, survived disaster. It's kind of roughly thematically in that genre. It's more of a Disaster Day of Crisis plays like an action game, and it has these set pieces where you're like shooting guns at people and doing, quick time events and all these things. And, it's not at all, as it turns out, what Disaster Report 4 plays like. And actually, Patrick, I'll ask, does Disaster Report, the other games, do they kind of play like Disaster Report 4?
So the only other one that I ever played was the first one, and this seems close enough. I mean, it's certainly within the same vein.
Right. And so, yeah, to me, my only exposure was Disaster Day of Crisis. So when I saw Disaster Report 4 pop up on Amazon and other places for the Switch, and it's also out on PS4 as well, I had roughly heard that because I remember when I played Disaster Day of Crisis, people were saying, oh, it's sort of reminds me of Disaster Report or whatever, right? And so I was aware of it for that reason, but I had, as it turns out, very little idea of what I was getting myself into when we kind of decided to play through a good chunk of it. But it's kind of interesting because, in other media, when you think about movies, there was the disaster genre of movies that really came about in the 1970s, right?
Towering Inferno.
Yeah, Towering Inferno. You had the Poseidon Adventure, Airplane, which is a parody, of course, of there is one called Airport 1970 something or whatever that's a parody of. But there was a whole genre of disaster movies in the 70s that were actually quite good. It's kind of a cool genre. They're fun movies to watch or whatever. Towering Inferno, a really good one. That might be maybe that one. It's hard, but either between that or the Poseidon Adventure. Angry Gene Hackman is great in the Poseidon Adventure. So it's actually a little surprising to me that American video game developers and Western video game developers have not picked up on this, since this was something that has already happened in Hollywood. You would think that they would imitate that like they like to imitate other things. But alas, no. It would just make perfect sense to make these into games, but they really haven't, at least in America. All right, so getting into the actual game now, the developer of this game is Granzella, which I remember looking this up yesterday, that basically it seems like it is a developer in Japan that acquired the rights to Disaster Report after its former company went out of business or something like that. At least that's not having the research department here to fact check me exactly. I think that's pretty much what happened there. I think development started in 2011 for the PS3 for Disaster Report 4, which would explain kind of its rough looks. It is not a game that you're going to buy to show off the graphical prowess of the systems that it's available for. For sure, the graphics aren't bad, but they're not like, bleeding edge or anything like that. And I can't speak to the PS4 version. I will say the Switch version, the frame rate isn't always the best. It kind of dips into that kind of low 20s area at times. I don't think it affects the gameplay at all, though. Like, there hasn't been an instance where I'm like, I can't play the game well because of this.
And that kind of frame rate shakiness is happening during the scenes where there aren't aftershocks.
Right.
So that's just like normal walking around. The frame rate is
Right.
not, like you said, not the best.
Right, right. So, it may be better on the PS4, but I have no idea, honestly, because that's not the version we're playing. But if you have a Switch, it's not a situation like you do sometimes see with Switch ports where the Switch version is like massively inferior. The game's totally playable. It's not a game that suffers because of it, but it is worth noting. But yeah, it had a really interesting development history. It was initially delayed because of the real-life Japanese earthquake that happened, some years ago. Fukushima, I think, right, is the area where that happened, or whereabouts. So, that earthquake pushed that off, I believe. And then eventually, they were able to finish development. So you really have a game started in 2011. I think it was released in 2018. And eventually made its way over to the Switch. The Switch port is more recent. We're like glancing at the box to try to fact check ourselves. Again, we have no research department right here because of the fireside chat format here. But anyway, that's kind of the rough history of disaster reports. So, all right, you fire up the game. And you immediately, and this is what's different from like Disaster Day of Crisis, which is more action oriented. You're immediately asked a whole bunch of things. And to me, this is something you're going to have to get used to with this game, is you are constantly given large sets of dialogue choices all over the place, right? And Patrick, do you think that some of those dialogue choices, are they all normal, or are some of them a little odd?
Some of them are a little odd.
Yes.
It's interesting because the dialogue choices, I'll just take the very first one, for example, okay, where there's an elderly lady who gets on a bus, all right? And you're sitting on the bus, and all of the dialogue choices actually lead to the, say that you give up your seat, but it's the nuance behind your motivation. Do you give up your seat for this reason? Do you give up your seat for that reason, etc.? So the dialogues, it's kind of like you may have a few variants of A, a few variants of B, and then a C version. So it's not just what you say, but why or how you say it.
Right, yeah. And also, the thing about the dialogue choices, it's not really like a Mass Effect dialogue tree kind of thing, really. It's more like you're talking to someone, and then there'll be a pause in the gameplay, and then you'll just get this huge list of things, right? And a lot of it will be repetitious. There'll be like 5 different versions of like, hey, maybe you should, I'm just making this up now, maybe you should just take the key, right? Like, I'll take the key. I think I'll take the key. Smiling slightly, I'll take the key, right?
Yep.
But then there'll be the one from left field.
Oh, yeah.
Which will be like, just again, to play with this made-up example, lie and claim you don't have the key at all and ask for money.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. Probably my absolute favorite one, which doesn't spoil anything in particular, but someone asks you, who are you? All right. And visually, you can look at the screen and be like, okay, you look like an early 20s Japanese male, okay? And there is the choice, like, one choice is give your name, another one is lie and give a different name. There's one which was like, act like you don't know your name. And the other option, which we just had to select because it was there, is proudly declare that you are Lieutenant General Gerald Chester.
Yes.
And so it selected that, and the character, I mean, with just the most, just blazing confidence, the on-screen character declares that he is the Lieutenant General Gerald Chester. And then when you went into the pause menu, under your character stats, it had a line there that said, assumed identity as Lieutenant General Gerald Chester.
That was
like
pretty
hours,
funny.
and that was hours later of playing the game. You went in and saw that was under your stats.
And the dialogue choices seem to be for just a couple of different things, as far as we know. Now, I will say I got about halfway through the game, and it felt like it ended a bunch of times, by the way, but then it just would keep going and going and going. So I still have a good bit of the game left to play, and I think some of the choices you make pay off in the second half. So I'm not going to speak too heavily on how the choices pay off, but it seems like, at least in the moment-to-moment, your dialogue choices are either influencing your morality points, which you have, good morality points, or you have morality points or immorality points, something like that, I think. Good or bad, right? Good points, bad points. Or you're just selecting them for the lulz, because some of the things your character will do as a consequence of selecting a dialogue choice are frankly hilarious. Like the first time this happened, you're talking to a man who like lost his lunch. This is really early, so it's not too spoilery to share this. It's like very early in the game, in the first 10 minutes, I think. And the guy's sitting on a park bench, and his lunch is spilled on the ground. And one of the things you can say to this guy, or actually not even say, but just think, because it's in parentheses, is like, he just gave you a big sob story about why he's there, which I won't get into, to not spoil it. But it's clearly a sad case.
Yes, it's actually a very depressing story.
Depressing, yes.
And he seems to be at like a super low point in his life.
Right, super low, right? One of the options you get is to think to yourself, this guy's so optimistic. I'm so impressed by this, right? Which is just total nonsense. That makes no sense. And if you select that, you don't actually say anything to the guy, but what you do is you rub your chin and smile and nod vigorously and just act stupid, like, oh yeah, you're really cool, right? And there's a bunch of moments like that. Like there's another moment where one of your options is to cry.
Yes. This is a great moment.
And I will say, unlike the one thing I mentioned before with the man that's sad, it does sort of make sense to cry in this situation. It's at least not a implausible emotional react given the situation. Right. But when you select it, you don't just... It's not like a single tear that comes down.
Right, because the situation, it was basically... What we thought you were selecting here is there were options of things you could say to express sadness, and then the cry option we thought was just, instead of saying something, just like, you'll cry, there'll be tears.
Right. Yeah, you just thought, okay, I'm just going to cry in solidarity with this person going through this hard time. And instead of that, when you select that, he just tilts his head back and screams like, wow, like a baby. Like
just begins wailing.
Just wailing. And it was so freaking funny, like how bizarre and uncontextual it was. And the other person doesn't even really react to it, which makes it even funnier, right? And the game is replete with dialogue options. And again, it'll be like, there's so many. There'll be like 15, or I'm exaggerating a little bit, but there'll be a lot, right? And there'll be just that one out of left field. Like there'll be these moments where you'll introduce yourself to people, and they'll be like, introduce yourself elegantly, introduce yourself coarsely, introduce yourself, with humor, whatever, right?
Right, yep.
And one time I picked introduce yourself elegantly, and you do this ridiculous hand gesture animation as you talk to them. So there's a lot of things that you can pick that are just genuinely funny and just weird, but funny and weird at the same time. But lest you think that the game is just 100% like dialogue choices, like a visual novel, that's not quite true. So you're navigating, an environment. All right, you start in kind of the city, and really as you progress, the earthquake is really the true and only enemy of the game. As far as, I still got the other half to go, but for the most part, the earthquake is the enemy and is the agent that's going to damage you. Yes, you have a health bar. There's stress that happens, although we haven't really had a negative consequence from stress, but we also haven't let stress get too bad, right? Because you can heal stress at save points and also by eating and drinking. But the earthquake, what will happen as you walk around the environment? And the game will even say, well, to be safe, you need to stand in these types of areas, but to progress the story, you have to explore, right? So you'll eventually have these moments where the earthquake happens, the aftershocks from the earthquake that you're in. And you can take damage in several different ways. You can take damage from falling down if you're not standing still, or you can also kneel down and that will stabilize you. You can take damage from falling objects that hit you, and you can also just flat out totally die from some, huge thing. And that's happened to me in the playthrough we've been doing. I think about 2 or 3 times I've had a building just fall on me. I've had something crush me. And the best one, though, that I had happen is, okay, so there's we're at these docks, and I'm going to try to frame this in a way that's not, going to spoil the moment for other people. I'll just say that there's a moment where I was standing somewhere, and there was an earthquake, an aftershock or whatever. I saw some people, kind of get sunk down into it, and I'm kind of laughing at them ha ha, suckers, I survived. And then the ground collapses under me, dead. Right?
Yep.
Dead.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. You think that you're watching NPCs get swallowed into the earth from a safe spot because you saw what started to happen and backed up, and then nope, the earth just kept crumbling, and then game over.
And so every time the earth starts to shake in this game, which of course uses it's a great use of rumble in the controllers, right? It's one of the best rumble games I've ever played. You have to really look around, and you have to ask yourself, are you in a safe area? You have to look around and see if there was one time where I saw a really heavy sign that was affixed to the wall of one of the buildings start to shake, and I'm like, yep, need to move. Probably the coolest thing I did in that regard, though, is, one time in the city, I'm walking around, it starts to shake, and I see the suspended highway that I'm underneath begin to buckle, and I dashed over to the sidewalk, and yep, that thing just collapsed entirely right next to me, right? That was pretty cool. The fact that, yes, you're going to get killed sometimes, but hopefully you're going to anticipate if you pay attention and you can avoid death. It feels good. It's probably one of the best executed aspects of the gameplay, actually, is the earthquakes and how they interact with you. So the other aspect of the gameplay that I'll talk about is, so yes, you're doing all this light exploration, and you're basically trying to escape the city to get out of the earthquake area. There is some kind of light item management. There'll be locked doors, keys you have to find, things like that. There's also this element of quests that you do for people. The quests, though, it's not like RPG quests where, you find someone in the town and you can take them if you want. They're sort of baked in, for the most part, into the main story. And they're usually necessary to progress, even if you don't realize it at the time. Even though I do think there's sort of some side NPCs that pop up that you can, help if you have the right item, and if you don't have the right item, then you can't, and that helps with repeat playthroughs. But for the most part, at least in my playthrough, you run into someone, you need to do something for them, like the teacher and the school children, really high school kids, and you have the other things like the woman that had the job interview that's stuck in the collapsed building. There's things like that, and by helping them, you find ways to progress through the story. So the game is sort of this combination of sort of pathfinding through this environment, not allowing the earthquake to damage you, right? You do get thirsty and hungry, and that requires buying things, which sometimes the convenience stores will actually try to jack up the prices on you because it's a disaster, right? And that becomes a problem, right? And that, by the way, what I like about the game's economy, Patrick, is it does entice you to be a bad person, because you can get more money that way and therefore heal yourself when you're stressed. I had a hard time doing that because I was super nice. Patrick, how do you think you're going to play this game when you do your own playthrough later?
I don't think that I'll have any money issues because I noticed that you were doing a lot of favors for people for free, and I'm probably going to, I just want to, get like a fair deal, right?
That's right. So. It's a fair deal. So I'm one of those people, as anyone that knows me will understand, I always pick the goody two-shoes routes in games. I have a hard time being a jerk to people in games, even though it's a fictional construct and it doesn't actually reflect on anything. I get really uncomfortable, actually. What I can do, though, is if someone is being a jerk to me, I don't have a problem picking a ridiculous response to someone being a jerk to me, but I can't be a jerk in games. It's always very, very hard for me to do. And so trying to cover all the bases in terms of the gameplay here, there is some vehicle navigation, some vehicle stuff that happens in the game so far. And again, we have the second half of the game really to play through. There's not a lot of traditional action. You're not shooting at anything. You're not punching anyone. There is a scene where like that would have been super handy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But alas, no. That's not a thing that appears to be in the game. But Patrick, a lot of times people have this idea, and since I study games academically, I read a lot of sort of academic game designers, people that have written books and things. And what they'll say is that, for a game to be a game, there has to be all this interaction and deep systems. And I think it's very influenced by the fact that these people come from pen and paper RPGs usually, right, where you have to have lots and lots of rules, lots of numbers that are being crunched, all that stuff. Disaster Report 4 does not do those things. It's something that you would call lightly interactive. But yet it still feels good to play as a game. Why do you think that is?
Wow, that's a good question.
You were talking to me earlier today about something that I found very interesting kind of in response to that, which is you were sort of talking about how Japanese developers aren't forgetting the player's role in the game.
Right. Because, I mean... honestly, a game is more than the rule set. The player is part of the game. And in Japanese game development, we've talked about service to the player, for example, before. But in many ways, that the player always seems to be deeply considered by Japanese developers. I mean, you see it in interviews and those... types of things where they don't forget that the player is part of the game. Because I guess what I would say about this game is the things that it does well are just extremely fun. Because, for example, it is using the dialogue because we've talked about that, the dialogue choices. In games with dialogue choices, I usually feel that they're too limited.
Right.
But here, the dialogue choices, again, it's not just do you say A, do you say B, or do you say C, but it gives you thoughts behind those dialogue choices. So you have your 3 variants of A. So it's like the developers are acknowledging, being like, okay, here's what you say, but why are you saying it? So you really get to think and express yourself into the game.
Right. Yes, I agree with that. And because here's the thing, right? Like, the constructs of a game have to sell you on a particular experience, right? And that's why you play a game, whatever that experience happens to be, right? The player has a particular fantasy that they want expressed in the game, and does the game support that? That's really the be-all, end-all of a game, right? Like, for instance, we were playing a lot of Rad Racer, and this is an old game. This is an old Square racing game on the NES, and it doesn't have any of the advantages of a modern racing game like whatsoever, right? It doesn't use 3D graphics, it's using sprites, whatever. But do all the components of Rad Racer support the fantasy of driving cross-country at high speeds? It absolutely does. And it was one of the best old games that we've played in the last couple of days, I think.
Yep.
It holds up really well.
And here's one of the tricks that Rad Racer does. And I have no idea what's in the instruction manual. But in-game, it doesn't say that you have a radio or anything like that. But you can switch the music that's playing at any time.
Right.
Which, number one, that's just neat to be able to pick whatever music you want for the race you're in. But what it's implicitly making you feel is that you're driving a car with the radio, and that you're playing with the radio. So it really reinforces the feeling of the player as a driver of a car.
Right, absolutely. And so it sells that fantasy, as does Disaster Report 4. Like, yes, its graphics are a little showing its age a little bit. Of a game that started in 2011. it's not going to be a game that impresses you that way, but the graphics are good enough to sell that you're in a city in Japan with the earthquake, right? The use of rumble, the dialogue choices that provide entertainment that way. So the sum of the parts, right? The whole is greater than the sum of the parts, as they say, and that is an aspect of games I actually really like. And Disaster Report 4, I think, is a great example of this. It also should be pointed out, it is a budget title. At least if you buy it now, these things have a way of going up in price.
Yep.
The modern gaming market is insane right now. So if you're interested in this game, it's about $40 on the Switch on Amazon right now. I highly recommend you snap it up before it becomes $300 or $1,000. I'm not saying it's going to hit those numbers, but it'd be crazy out there. It's really random what games go up in price.
Yep. And the reaction of people on message boards to the game seems to be very polarized. And polarized usually means there will be future demand.
Yes. And so, be on the lookout for this. Don't let it go up in price a great deal. So let's talk about the polarization. Certainly not a game for everybody, right? Like, there's going to be some people that play this and they're like, I'm not shooting a gun at anything. I'm not doing action gamey things. What is this? This is stupid, blah, 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 right? So if that's going to be you, you know who you are, play something else, right? But if you like games that are immersive, that have this degree of virtual tourism, like, let me put it this way. If you're the sort of person that would say of Shenmue, there's some things they could have done better, but boy, I really enjoyed being in suburban Japan. If that's you, you'll definitely like this game, I think. I know that's a weird comparison, but like, I feel like any player that sort of likes games where you like to kind of hang out and sort of soak in the environment and enjoy the story, you're going to enjoy this game. If you're one that's like, really, you're always thinking about damage per second and area of effect, and you're like, I'm going to min-max my character and all that stuff, this is probably not a game for you. So, you know who you are, right? So, it's not a perfect game, but it is fun. Certainly, I think there's some things they could have, gone deeper in. It's hard to see the results of some of the choices you make, even though that may happen in the latter half of the game. I don't know, Patrick, is there some elements to this that you think could have been done a little bit better?
It's tough to tell yet because, we haven't completed your playthrough. I just started to test out a little bit of that variability. It's hard to tell right now. I think we'll have to come back to it later.
Right.
Because the part where maybe it could be done better, or maybe we'll find out it was done expertly, really don't know yet, is in terms of the dialogue choices you're making, are a significant portion of them relevant to the course of the game?
Right.
And I just don't know yet, so...
And it's not, I will say this, in terms of like how much of this is kind of like just a graphic adventure versus action. There are, it's a little bit, it's not just a straight like graphical adventure game where all you're doing is moving a character, right? There was like a light stealth section that we had to do.
Yeah.
There are, dangers in the environment that you have to avoid. One criticism I will make is they're not always consistent, though, on whether or not you can yeet yourself off cliffs.
Oh.
Yes. So just as a warning, if you play this, you'll get a false sense of security because 99% of the time they put a blocking volume. They keep you from falling off the edges of things. So you can run up to the edge of the building and you can't just jump off. Except for the times they don't. And you'll just fall and die and be like, what the heck? Right?
Yep.
So, be careful about that. But overall, though, I think most of the game's issues are really of a technical nature, right? Mm-hmm. Like some of the weird animation glitches.
Yeah, the IK inversion. Yeah.
Yes, the inverse kinematic stuff, which basically means now I don't 100% know, I'm not on the dev team if that's really what's going on, but it looks like it's a problem with the IK on the character, which just means that's a thing that people use to make things happen to where, okay, you have a character standing on something that's not level. How does the character know to have one leg lifted up if they're on like a step or something. And IK is a method to use that can do things like that, like on physics with character models and skeletons stuff. It's not really my area of expertise either, but obviously as a game developer, I'm adjacent to these things. And there seems to be some issues with that in the game where if you're standing on like a ledge or something and your leg is propped up, your thigh will start gyrating wildly.
And in a direction that looks very painful.
Yes, it does look very painful. Yeah. And your character seems to glitch out, especially when wearing the alternate outfits that you get in the game. Yep. Like your character will just kind of disappear, at least the body will. So it's got some technical glitches, certainly not beyond reproach on a technical basis. But I think in terms of is it selling you on this I'm surviving an earthquake simulation? I think it does a pretty good job of that.
Yeah, I mean, I would actually say it's the best game I've played since Nier Automata.
Right. All right, so I think we've well and truly covered Disaster Report 4. We both like it. It is both, we both acknowledge that it's got technical issues, but it is a fun game and it's inexpensive right now. So definitely check it out if it feels like it can be your jam. I just wanted, as a quick postscript, I know we're running out of time here. We watched a good bit of Tommy Wiseau's The Neighbors. Actually, we watched the first 4 episodes of the 6 that are out there, right? And we're both fans of Tommy Wiseau. We both love The Room. I don't think we were prepared for what The Neighbors was going to be like. So again, just for the audience to understand, The Neighbors is a sitcom that Tommy Wiseau made in, what was it, like 2014, I think, something like that.
2014.
Yeah, 2014. And it's basically, he is a manager of an apartment complex, and it's just about all the zany people that live in the apartment complex and everything.
Yep, it's like a modern Faulty Towers.
Yes. Except here's the thing. Patrick, I'm going to ask you what your impressions of it were in a second, but mine is sort of like, okay, you know how The Room is like almost like a Lifetime made-for-TV movie, especially if you're not paying that much attention to it. So you can have it on, and if you're not really looking close, it doesn't even seem that abnormal unless you actually start watching it, and then you notice how bizarre it is. That's not what The Neighbors is, okay? There's nothing subtle about The Neighbors. The Neighbors feels like I'm being picked up by my lapels and shook for like each 30-minute episode. I'm getting screamed at and just assaulted. It's like sandpaper on my brain is the best way to describe it. What is your impression of The Neighbors?
Well, to kind of explain my impression. So in the Disaster Artist film, okay, about the making of The Room, where there's the scene where they're up on the roof and what's the character's name? Mark.
Yes.
Mark tells a story about a woman who was beat up and hospitalized, and Tommy Wiseau leans back and says, "Ha ha ha! What a story, Mark!"
Right,
and they're basically like, "Why would you react like that?" And Wiseau's response is, "Sometimes people do crazy things."
Right. Yes.
So, yeah, if that's his view of how people behave normally, then knowing that The Neighbors was intended to be a zany comedy, he basically says, well, people are going to behave strangely and crazy when they're normal, so we have to make sure these people really behave crazy since they're supposed to be crazy now. So it's just 120% crazy. Like there's, you mentioned to me earlier today, talking about one character in one scene where he wanted to get across the idea that this guy's a troublemaker.
Right.
And there was something, why this guy he does like 5 or 6 things that are completely unacceptable behavior, all in the span of 2 minutes.
Yes.
And if he had done any one of those things, then you would be able to look at this character and say, wow, that's the troublemaker. But it's just like Tommy Wiseau just really always wants to go to the 120% to get his idea across. So he had this character do everything possible.
Right. Yes. Yes. We're running out of time, so I'll just wrap this up by saying it's unlike The Room, where I think anyone could watch, and if you like kind of so bad it's good type stuff, find amusement in it. The Neighbors is massively an acquired taste. I think you have to be probably a little bit inebriated, probably with friends. It is not something you can just sit down, on the toilet and bring up on YouTube and watch and be entertained by it. It is an assault on the senses. It like I said, it's like sandpaper to the brain. Someone screaming in your face for 30 minutes. I will say in episode 4. There was and it had to do with actually just what you got done talking about, that character. Right. That's probably the first episode where there's genuine, non-ironic laughs.
Right.
There's plenty of laughs that you're going to have over the absurdity of it, but actual really funny.
Right. Like, this is funny because it was scripted in a funny way.
Right.
Not because it's just completely bonkers.
Right. And yes, and I'll say probably the best part of the show to demonstrate what we're talking about is the end of episode 3, which just devolves into madness, just complete madness. Like they're having some party at the apartment manager's office, all the tenants in the show and whatever, celebrating the birthday of a major character.
Right.
It just falls apart into madness.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, slamming birthday cakes, except instead of slamming into the face of the person whose birthday is, they just slam it into someone else's face.
Right,
and
yes.
It's just what is going on?
Right. It's sort of like if you've ever seen Event Horizon, where it's that little video clip from when the crew of the ship accidentally ends up in hell and they're eating each other and all that. That's the show. Feels like that video clip from Event Horizon. It's chaos. It's dark energy. Only watch it while drinking adult beverages. I beg you. It's on YouTube, easily found. All the episodes are found on YouTube, so you don't have to spend any money. Although Tommy would love it if you bought the DVDs. He would also love it if you bought, apparently, his underwear from his website, because that gets brought up in the show all the time. But anyway, I should wrap this up right now. So thank you for listening to The Drawing Room. Again, you can find me, Rob Howard, Rojo Games on Twitter, Rojo Games 80 on Instagram. Please, 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 please give us a 5-star review, like and subscribe, all those things on your preferred podcast listening service, iTunes, whatever. And until next time.